Well, hey, all my friends, welcome back. Welcome again. Will you welcome me into your ear listening life? It's been a while, but it's the Everyday Missionary Podcast back to life after 6 months of being away. Yes, probably if this is popping up in your feed right now, you're going to be, oh, yeah, I forgot about that podcast. I forgot that existed because it was an ancient, like, 6 months in podcast land is ancient, man. It was like, oh yeah, that was like, wasn't that back in the 50s? You know what I mean? It's kind of like that. But welcome once again to kind of the reemergence of the Everyday Missionary Podcast. This is going to be episode 320. So yes, 319 was in June. 320 is in December. Hopefully 321 isn't June of 2026. I'm hoping to kind of get back to this, but I did take some time off by design, in part. Like, I think I was at a point where I'm like, you know what? I've been doing this for a long time and a pretty consistent clip. That last 6 months before I kind of took a pause was a little bit more broken up. And I'll be honest, just to start off, I'm kind of glad that I took that time off because, to churn out a podcast every week for years can be taxing, especially when this is just a labor of love. There's no revenue generated from this. There was no there's this added benefit or incentive. I'd say sometimes even in the podcast, it was a source of my sharing or teaching that would get me more in trouble than not in trouble even. And so it was almost like, hey, I generate this thing, I get a bit more grief for it, and I get no payment from it. And so it really had to be a labor of love. And yet when I kind of paused it back in June, I just felt like, man, I just needed to take that break. Certainly since June up to now, there's been plenty of things I could have talked about. There's been plenty of chaos and division and debates and cultural issues and things that certainly in my mind, I was like, man, I think Jesus's message speaks into a lot of these problems. I should reboot the podcast. And then I'm like, but my heart's just not in it. And I think it was good then for that 6 months. I think there's even been, for me, even more evaluation or reevaluation of how do we bring voice into the current kind of context of things. And I think for me, even part of the heart of that was to say, like, how do we do that in a way that has more diplomacy, has more peacemaking at its core? Because what I do know is that there are many platforms out there that are kind of in the same space, but a lot of the platforms that are most popular are also the ones that kind of double down on side A or double down on side B. They get a lot more traction because it's a lot more partisan. And I don't think that's really my heart as I go forward. Like, I'm looking, this matter of fact, over this last 6 months, a good chunk of that was eaten up by me teaching through the Sermon on the Mount every Sunday. And all the more, I think, while I loved the Sermon on the Mount at the start of that series and certainly before it, I came out the other side with kind of a commitment that said, I need to fight for that thing to be applied as best as I can in every context that I'm operating in. And so when I look at that and I see it's about reconciliation, I see it's about peacemaking, I see it's about loving enemies, I see it's about kind of going the extra mile, turning the other cheek, all those things, not judging lest I be judged, but really dealing with my own self-righteousness so I can then, in genuine selflessness, care for other people that may have something going on in their life. Like, all of those things, I think they resonated with me more. So then I knew when the podcast came back, I wanted to face it in a different way. Now, in saying that, that doesn't mean that there is going to be times that I'm going to push or prod or say something that might sit wrong with a person. Even today in this podcast, that could happen because we're talking about a mosque in our town, and I'm an evangelical pastor in relationship to that mosque. But I also want it to be something where the heart is, if there's something I really believe or I really have a conviction on, I don't want to use shame. I don't want to use belittlement. I don't want to use, I got you as the tool. I hope to be compelling. I hope to win over more than win. I hope to, in all of it, try to display an evenness, but at the same time, too, also deal with the fact that we all miss the mark in some way. And there's going to be things at times where I go, I think those are sinful things, and I want to call into those things. I don't want to call those things out, but I want to kind of call into those things, speak into those areas, and hopefully paint a picture of a better way. And so that's kind of the heart behind the Everyday Missionary, especially I think in a culture that is so divided, is so partisan, is so kind of this side versus that side. More than ever, the followers of Jesus don't need to contribute to that discord, but we need to kind of be something different, and especially different for the people that may not have as much voice and that kind of thing. So that's going to be a lot of the heart. And even today's topic, man, it's going to be about how can we be really great missionaries and especially in a context where there is a lot of reaction or fear or whatever else. It's like there's a lot of different layers in which we get to model Jesus. It's not just simply what we say, but it's how we carry ourselves. It's how we react, how we respond to things, the tone in which we speak. And are we really desiring to try to see enemies become friends and neighbors? That's going to be a lot of the spirit, I think, of what we're talking about. So with that, today's topic is on the reality that I live in a wee little town that found out recently. I mean, some of us have known for a while, actually, but I think it became more popular on social media in the last few weeks that we are a wee little town that's suddenly going to be the home, potentially, of a rather large mosque. Now, I almost say that facetiously because, honestly, it's not a rather large mosque. We are a wee little town. But in this wee little town, I think there was a surprise for people that went, oh, wow, there is a group of Muslims that want to build a mosque on about just a little less than 3 acres of property right on the main street of our community, which has just literally one main street. We have all these arterials that kind of go up the hill into neighborhoods and schools and stuff. But really, we are kind of Mayberry. We're that quintessential town that probably stretches 2 miles total from beginning to end, not just city limits, but just kind of the idea of what makes our town. It's probably 2 miles long, maybe a little shy of that. We have like 2 grocery stores. We have 3 gas stations. We have 1, 2, 3 stoplights. It is what it is. We have a large white collar population in the tech industry. So we're kind of a weird mix. If you don't live here in Duval and you're listening to the podcast, we're just this weird kind of eclectic place. We are a higher revenue kind of community, higher education community, and kind of a suburb of like Bellevue and Redmond and that kind of thing. But we're just kind of an interesting place. And I think because of that, I think the news of a potential mosque coming into this little town all the more had this kind of disruption. And so from that, there has been a lot of recent dialogue about this possibility. So again, for many, many people, it wasn't on their radar. In the last 2 to 3 weeks, it suddenly was on their radar. Part of that was because there was the hearing examiners, kind of get together where it was really kind of going through the final steps that move toward giving them the permission to build a facility in our community. And so with that, what happens is there's a lot of preliminary stuff, a lot of technical things are shared, and then it's open to the community to go ahead and voice support, concern, question, commentary, whatever it is. And so, with that, there's this open door for people to share in a public forum. Now, for me, this is a little bit interesting. So let me give you some backstory. I have lived in Duval for 18 years. In the course of that 18 years, there's only been 3 structures, 4 if I count a small one, 4 structures built on our main street in the 18 years that I've been here. So that's to say that construction on our main street isn't very common. Of the 4 things that were built, first of all, it was the King County Public Library. After that, it was a storage facility. After that, it was a little donut place called Darcy's Dinky Donuts. And then the 4th was our facility, Redemption Church's hub. We call it the hub. And our facility and the storage facility were by far the larger ones in that 18-year period. I say all of that to say that any construction project on our main street is very rare. There's limited parcels left even on Main Street, but it's incredibly rare to do it. That's one thing. The second thing, having done it, I would say that it's incredibly expensive to build on our main street in any way. And so I know those challenges there, which is why when people go like, we need this or we need that, why a mosque? Why not another thing? Or when we were building our building, why another church on Main Street? We don't need a church. We need whatever it is, Trader Joe's. Well, the reality is it's incredibly expensive to build on our main street, and most commercial projects go too expensive for the return on investment, not going to do it unless it's apartments. Keep that in your mind. Or some kind of tight living dwelling thing where you could stack many people into tightest space as possible. That is about the only thing, or a storage unit that's people's stuff in a bunch of tight spaces, and that's what's feasible or whatever else. But for us, I know what it's like also then to build on our main street when it's very expensive, and I know what it's like to be a religious organization building a building on Main Street, and the challenges there, both financially and practically, but also public perception, public opinion on nonprofits building buildings on Main Street in our city. And so I know that challenge too. And so from that, I'm going to be speaking from a variety of different angles on this, right? So I'm going to be speaking as a follower of Jesus and how that has been kind of my driver in this. I'm going to be speaking as somebody that knows what it's like to build a building in our community and the challenges that are there. What it's like to then field public opinion for those who may not care for a religious space on our main street. I'm going to speak into the fiscal realities, the traffic realities, the taxation issues, the commercial building space issues. But I'm also going to speak into this particular Islamic group that wants to build the mosque. And that may be a lot of what I do in connection to then my own understanding of Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount, his mission for us, and how all of that kind of plays together. So I hope you bear with me in that this is not like this very well organized. Like I don't ever use a script for this. This is very much like if you ask me a question, this is the answer I can kind of give you kind of thing. That's kind of the way I'm operating. I do have a lot of information about the group that wants to do the mosque. And so, I've spent the last few months doing a lot of homework, both on this group. I've been getting to know some of the leadership in this group. I've been building friendships with people in this group. I've been getting to understand their heart and their tone and their emphasis and everything else. And I wanted to bring a lot of that to this, as well as a lot of other just experience of, again, doing a building in our community, because I also have a heart of trying to, as best as I can, inform people as accurately as I can of the realities of things. Because if there's anything I know in the current climate, it's very hard to find somebody that's coming into a topic and they're not coming impassioned in it, and they're not coming with an agenda to this side or that side. They're just trying to say, here's what I've learned, here's what I've experienced, here's the clarifying questions I've tried to ask and receive answers for, and I want to move forward in that. So that's kind of been the spirit of all of it. And as I go, I'm sure there's going to be some things I say that at some point is going to sit wrong with somebody, because I'm human, and I'm doing my best, and I can be a little sarcastic and try to be funny at times or whatever else, and somebody's humor is somebody else's offense. I get it, but I'm going to try to do my best. So I know that's a lot of preliminary stuff, but I think the best place for me to start is probably with the group themselves. Now, one of the things you may not realize, I was like 2 hours ago learning this, that there's actually more than one Muslim group in our community. And actually the anticipated mosque would be a second mosque. There's actually already a first mosque. I don't know if mosque would be quite the right word, but there is a facility with prayer mats. And really that's kind of the essence of a mosque, is it's a place where they engage in prayer and some other elements of the ritual. We actually have had one in Duval now for a bit of time. I think maybe a couple of years. And so it's interesting that I'm like, well, I thought that group was the same as the group that wants to build the big facility. And I was told today, no, two separate groups. And so oddly enough, we've already had one group in our community for a while. Now it just happens to be that this other group that's coming in is going to build a much larger, very obvious facility in town. So part of this is to say there's actually two separate groups that are in our community. I have not met anybody from the other particular group. I know they try to fly under the radar intentionally, just as a tidbit of something I learned today. They have a small space kind of on our main street, actually. And some of the members of that Islamic community said, hey, we should at least advertise a little bit in case there's other Muslims in the community. They want to come and pray. They want to come and be a part of our community. And some of the other leaders in the mosque said, no, we don't want to put up sandwich boards and signage and let people know we're here, because frankly, we have to worry about our security, right? And I want you to keep that in mind, right? That part of what I'm looking at here, and part of some of the things you're going to hear, as much as maybe there's some that may feel fear about the idea of Muslims with prominence in our community, those Muslim communities also have a fear of hatred, retaliation, some kind of bigotry directed toward them. And I can tell you, as a church leader, we have one of our pastors, Scott Thompson. He's our executive pastor, but he's also in charge of all of our safety and security protocols in our building. And every week, I mean, without exception, every week, he's a part of a forum that's looking at like security risk analysis and threats to religious institutions and mosques, synagogues, and churches at varying degrees. Maybe catastrophic. It may be just, like they slapped pig's blood on a mosque and said, we don't want you, or whatever else. But there is a lot of hatred against all religious organizations in our culture, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, you name it. And so they have those fears too. Like if we're well known in the community, we have a threat that we have to consider. And I just say that because if you're a Christian and you go, hey, there's people against churches, there's been people that shot up churches, crashed their trucks into churches and did terrible things or whatever else. And I go, yeah, all these different faith traditions, what they have in common is they have to worry about security right now. And so the one smaller mosque that's in our community, they don't even want to be publicly out there because they just go, there is a risk involved in that. And so they choose to fly below the radar. But then there is this current group that's getting a lot more of the press and the notoriety and everything else because, again, they have a 3-acre parcel. They're going to build on the majority of that parcel. So there'll be a mosque. There'll be like a teaching center. There'll be, I think, somewhere around 90 parking stalls, so a rather large parking lot, and then a commercial property directly on Main Street. So the mosque will be up off of Main Street toward the far edge of the property, furthest from the main road. And then there's going to be a small commercial property on the frontage of their space that I think is going to be 3 different like commercial buildings, or one building with 3 commercial spaces in it. And that was something requested by the city to say, hey, we need something commercial there too. So unlike Redemption Church, when we built our building, there is nothing there commercial. There is nothing that's going to generate any kind of property taxes because of the tax exempt status. What the mosque is actually doing is providing some commercial property that can generate tax revenue by way of it being a for-profit entity. And so just kind of an interesting little tidbit there. But I started looking in to this particular group, and I'm going to mess up their name until I really get it down. In fact, even as I'm meeting friends within their leadership, I just told them, like, dude, I'm very American. I'm going to butcher your name until I get it right. And they're very generous and gracious with me, and they don't laugh at me every time I mess it up. But it is the Dawoodi Boras. That is their official name. What's interesting about this group, just in case you don't maybe know, because you go Islamic. Well, one Islamic is all Islamic. Every mosque is the same kind of mosque. And I go, no, man, absolutely not. Islam is as diverse, I continue to find, as Christianity is. As much as there's denominations within Christianity, there's like denominations within Islam. And so one of the first things I want to kind of share with you is this Islamic group are not Arab. They are not Arab. They're not rooted in Saudi Arabia. They're not rooted in Iran, Iraq. They're not rooted in any of the customary things you think. They're actually an Indian group of Muslims. So a little different. And so they go back to the 16th century. This particular group started in the 16th century, and they have a system of governance that is very hierarchical, which means they have one teacher during that lifetime, and then there's a succession to another teacher, and then that one does the lifetime, and there's a succession to another teacher. That one goes to the lifetime. And so it's just a pass down from shepherd to shepherd to shepherd. And so literally their name even kind of would literally translate as merchant followers of our founder, Dawood, right? And so that is kind of the spirit of it. And so they just admit, like, we have one teacher. That teacher is handed down teaching to the next, to the next, to the next, but we have a single shepherd. So we follow one shepherd, but we follow that shepherd as a group of merchants. And that's another one of the fascinating things about this group. They're very committed to kind of entrepreneurial spirit. They are in the medical field. They are lawyers. They are in IT. They are in software development. They are business owners, real estate investors. They're really known for working hard, making decent wages to take care of their family and the people around them and that kind of thing. And so they're much more engaged in that. And so I think that's an important thing just to understand, like when you're thinking about if this group is to come into Duval and build this mosque, what makes them tick? Well, they have a single leader. They follow that leader. And then in that, they try to really make a lot of contribution to the betterment of their society. Now, with that, they have a very centralized form of how they understand their leadership. In fact, a good way to see it is one community under one spiritual guide. So globally, they are about 1 million people, right? So planet-wide, this one spiritual leader is the leader to about 1 million or so people. But when it comes to what they teach, there's a certain kind of simplicity in it in some ways. And so they're really big into the Quran. They like Quran memorization. They want to make sure that everybody kind of knows the Quran. So if I translated it into our world, Oftentimes as the church, we say, hey, we're going to read the Bible in a year. And then we encourage people like, hey, like I did Sermon on the Mount. And they said, if you memorize the Sermon on the Mount, that would be an epic way to do it. I'm going to do something here real quick with my computer because it just went to something. It's been so long since I've done a podcast. I'm like, oh, yeah, man, I got to make sure I got some of those settings right. But they're really big on the Quran. And then they're also really big on ritual order, cleanliness, and discipline. So internal to their faith, they have certain dietary restrictions, pretty typical to Islam, but they take those things really, really seriously. They have a personal sense of just moral discipline in their lives. Like they want to make sure that, hey, if this is what we say we believe, we do this thing that we say, and we're super, super committed to that. And so that's a major component of what makes them tick. And then they just really take their rituals seriously, right? And so they have their prayer time every day, a certain amount of times a day. So they want to make sure they really stay with that. They have certain holidays throughout the year that they're committed to. They'll want to really stick with that. And so those are the things that sort of galvanize them as a community. Now, with that said, one of the questions that everybody seemed to have around here is one of the rumors that was going on is, they're going to have a great big blowhorn on top of the mosque, and 5 times a day it's going to do a call to prayer, and the whole neighborhood is going to hear that racket whether they ask for it or not. And the good news is that is not a thing. In fact, one of my friends over there, I texted him here a few nights ago, and I said, hey, just a funny question. This is going around a lot, man. Are you guys going to have like a big blowhorn and a 5 times a day call to prayer? And he just responded back like with a laughing emoji. And he's like, we don't do that, bro. Like, that's not our thing. He's like, in India, like when it's the central thing of the entire region, we have it there under our one leader, but we don't do that in all the places around the world that we have mosques. That's just not our thing. And I joked with him. I said, yeah, you probably have an app for that. And he goes, no, in fact, we do. We have an app for that. And so I'm like, there you go, man. So they have an app for that. I think that's great. So that's just even a little tidbit there. So if you're concerned about it blowing a horn 5 times a day, no, they don't have that. But they just really do have a commitment to their internal rituals and things that kind of make them distinctive. And that's a lot of it. It's like internal to their community of faith, they have some real core values. And I think in some ways, one of the things I was looking at in all of the stuff that is published about them is you almost want to see them less as a mosque and maybe more as like a monastery, and that's a little bit using Christianese. But as I looked at it, it has way more of those features, even to the point, like if you think like, a mosque means they all show up for 2 services on Sunday. You know what I mean? They have a 9 and a 10:45, That's not really how they work. Them all being together at the same time is much more rare than what we do every week as churches. And so they have central holidays in the year where they're all together. But for the most part, they're much more monastic in the sense that they're all doing life and work and in their homes and other places doing things. And they live kind of distinctly in their Muslim faith within their homes and that kind of thing. But then they go out into the world and they do their jobs and they contribute to their neighbors and things like that. And then occasionally they're all coming together for really important events. And so in many ways, even this mosque is going to be more like a place where lots of what I would translate into like Bible studies, which is not everybody in the church showing up, but it's some subgroup showing up. It's going to be the same for them. It's going to be like subgroup showing up for different things, teaching, Quran memorization, classes, certain rituals that they engage in or whatever else. But it's not like us where every week everybody's showing up. So it's a little bit different that way too. So some other things to understand about them. Really when it comes to the community center, which is this mosque is the actual. There's 2 buildings. There's the mosque, which is really where their prayer mats are in the mosque. And then across from that is their community center where pretty much everything else happens. So the mosque is very much what I would call holy space. And the community center is where they have meals and they do classes and they can have all sorts of different gatherings and things like that. But they have highly organized local congregations. Their community centers and mosques serve social, educational, and religious roles. They get together for community meals, charitable systems, mutual aid, but there is clear expectations around participation, conduct, and generosity. And that's something that's really big for them is, again, in their internal matrix, it's very tight, right? They all the men wear a very similar white or cream hat with gold embroidery. That's a marker for them. The women have very colorful head coverings And that's a marker for them. And that's a way they can openly identify one another in the community. And so they value that because it's a sense of like solidarity, not terribly unlike Orthodox Jews, right? With the hats and the big curls down the sides of their head. It's a very clear, like, we're a part of this group. And that's the same thing for them. But when they come together, it's just a reinforcing of the heritage and their culture and their theological systems and their basic belief structures and that kind of thing. And then they have this kind of physical appearance to kind of remind each other, hey, this is our distinctive in that sense. Now, if I got into the weeds a little bit, they are of the Shia branch within Islam. So you have Sunni and you have Shia. They're of Shia, but Shia actually has three different branches. Actually, probably has more than that, but there's three distinctly different branches, and so they're of one of those branches. In their case, they're highly centralized. They have a very strong communal discipline system. Again, very visibly different in the distinctives of how they dress, and that's kind of what makes them stand out as unique in that sense. What's interesting to me now, and this is where I'm getting out of the details that may not matter as much, and I think to the things that really matter. When it comes to civic interfaith and kind of the context of that, they don't really have political ambition. They don't try to engage in social isolation. They have religious discipline for sure, but their whole idea is to say whatever culture we go into, whatever country we find ourselves in, we embrace its civic values, we embrace its laws, we embrace a celebration of that country's uniqueness or distinction, and we're not trying to change that. There is nothing. They started in the 16th century, so they have plenty of history behind them. And if you look at all of the teaching of their shepherd for that whole time, some things that have never come up. They've never encouraged political rebellion or theocratic rule. They have never tried to force conversions on anybody. They've never encouraged withdrawal from the broader society. They never have said, hey, we are supreme over non-Muslims. They've never looked and said, oh, you guys are infidels and we're better. Like, this branch of Islam has none of those trappings. In fact, what's interesting is if you go to their website, you're going to see some things that would actually make them unpopular with many other Muslims. For example, they encourage and support the idea of women's equality, women's rights, empowerment of women. They are really big into like ecological preservation and protection. They actually do a 4th of July celebration every year. They've lived in the Seattle area for about 50 years. I went and I looked up their branch, and I looked up anything, any police report, any problem here, anytime they've ever gone to schools and said, I don't want pork in the schools, everything should be kosher. None of that. For 50 years, they've been in our area, and they've been nothing but great neighbors. They've been nothing but contributors to society. They've been nothing but people that want to honor and respect the laws of the land, and they just really kind of get behind those things. And so I'm saying some of those things because, again, I think there's the stereotype and the fear, and you imagine the worst thing, and you go, that worst thing has got to be everybody. Or as one person I think said this week, they said they're just pretending to be nice until they finally have control, and then they'll turn on you. And I'm like, well, they've been around since the 16th century and haven't done that. And they've been in our area for 50 years and they haven't done it. And they've been in other places in the world and they really haven't done it there either. And so there's also the possibility that it's not like if you've met one Muslim, you've met them all. Or if you've seen one angry on the news, you've seen them all. But much like Christianity, there is a plurality of ideas, and there's a lot of different shades in there. And for all of my interactions with this group so far, I find them to be very neighborly, very soft-spoken, very kind, very encouraging, very much ready to jump in. I mean, even with the floods this week, I was getting peppered, by some of my friends at the mosque saying, how can we help? What can we do? Where can we go? What is going to be necessary? Like 3 of the guys showed up down at the hub when we opened up our property for the relief center, and they just showed up like, hey, how can we help? What things can we contribute to? And I love that, right? Like, they're really here to give back, and that's been their thing. Like, if you look at a lot of their statements and a lot of the things they engage in, it's food relief, it's food pantries, it's raising funds for fresh water and wells in impoverished parts of the world. They are just very much like, one of the key distinctives of theirs is not we are trying to convert our neighbors. It's that we're just trying to love and do good to our neighbors, that we believe in generosity and hospitality and opening ourselves up to others. Now, with that said, they still do it with a very clear sense of religious distinctive. So, like, we as evangelicals, especially the contemporary ones, sometimes we're so much trying to do evangelism. We look a lot like the culture. We've got electric guitars and drums and light shows and fog machines and video games in the foyer, and you name the whole thing. Like, we take on every cultural lookalike to be like, see, we're just so like accessible and so familiar, and they don't do that. They say, no, in our communities of faith, in our worship spaces, we are very distinctive. I would maybe liken this to the Amish or to the Quakers or certain Mennonites or whatever else, where you go like, oh no, that's very, very clearly a different culture inside there. But then the way they contribute to the broader culture is saying we want to embrace that where we can, and we want to give back to it as best as we can. And that's sort of the spirit behind this particular group. And again, so for me, I can look at, several hundred years of teaching tradition in which they've never handed down teaching that is trying to usurp, attack, vilify outside groups. And then I can look at a 50-year history in the Seattle area and say it's kind of the same thing. They've just kind of given back, and they've never demanded anything in return. And now in my interactions with them, I have found them to be an incredibly peace-loving group, very neighborly in a lot of ways, very engaged, wanting to know our neighbors, and wanting to do whatever they can to just be a part of the society while also being distinctive in their faith. I think one of the things, and I'm just speaking now kind of pastorally in religious space in America, I think the reality is probably very few people would ever actively convert to this particular branch because A, they're not trying to incite opposition, and so it's a little bit like there's no militancy there. So in some weird way, it's kind of like they're just too peace loving to get those converts. But they're also so distinctly unique in the things that they cherish internally, from that self-discipline, purity standard, dietary ritual standard, that very few outsiders would probably join up with that anyway. They could find all of the positive traits of that group in other faith arenas that would have probably less dietary and other requirements, kind of in that space. So in a weird sort of way, I think they pretty much grow by way of you're born into it. And that's the sense of it that I kind of have. It's really more going to be that more than there's a lot of outside converts that kind of convert in, because again, they're too peace loving, and also they're so puristic in their internals. It takes a very particular kind of person probably to join into that either way, right? And so for me, as I've kind of dug into them, and then I've gotten to know them, and I've asked questions of them, I came to the place of saying, you know what? I think these would make really good neighbors in our community. I really do. Like, I felt really at peace. If I'm blunt, there would be some Christian leaders around our country with some churches that I would be very uncomfortable moving into Duval. Like, I'd be like, nope, you freak me out. You got a militancy about you that's all about pitting A against B, and I wouldn't want that in my city. Where I look at this group and I go, they want unity, they want peace, they want neighborliness. They want a good faith effort to be involved in our community and only make our community a better place for it. So because of all of that, I actually sent a letter to the city during this whole examiner time where I said, hey, as somebody in this community, I would really welcome this group. I think they are going to be a net positive for us and not a net negative in any way. I think they're going to rise the tide on goodwill. And I think it's going to be more in a very real applied way. In other words, here are people that are very culturally different than us, but they really want their neighbors' best. And I hope that causes all of us as other neighbors to then kind of go, yeah, I want to lean into that too. There's people different than me. They see the world differently than me. They vote differently than me. They have opinions different from me. But can we move toward genuine neighborliness and peacemaking? I think they're going to force us into that place in a good way. Like, they're going to compel us to that place in a good way. And my hope is everybody else around them can embrace who they actually are as an individual group and not paint a broad brush thing on this is what they are and this is what they think, but really digging into who they really are, what they really think, the track records that they have set, and embracing that and not thinking that this is just some Trojan horse. They're just faking it until they have enough authority and they're going to take over everything. There's just nothing in them that's ever had that thing. That's never been a part of them. And I think if we are wanting to judge everybody on their actual merits and not just judge the book by an alleged cover, I think you're going to find that actually this is a pretty great group of people to have. Even if you don't see the world as they do, or you don't share the faith that they have, or whatever else, I think from a civic perspective, I think this is going to be a real good thing for our community at large, right? So that's kind of the people group of it. Let's talk about the actual structure, right? Because that's kind of been part of the thing. And if you're not aware of this discussion within our community, there was at this hearing examiners event, dozens and dozens and dozens, I don't know how many people weighed in on that, both in written form and then also in verbal form, live and on a Zoom call. And there was a lot of commentary, a ton of commentary. And that is across the spectrum. And that's the other thing I want to say, too. I want you to remember as you're listening to this and thinking about this and processing it in your own world, that there is a spectrum of opinion. There is a spectrum of concern. There is a spectrum of support or opposition. And it's not just you're either in this camp or that camp. Your motives are this or they're that. But there's a lot of flavor in there, right? There's shades of color. And I think that's important because it is so easy right now when everything does seem so binary to just measure everything in terms of binary. And I saw some of that come out in the meeting. I'm going to speak to that. But I say all of that because I think there are some people that are just 100%, we love it, we want it, they should build it, right? There's going to be those. And then there's going to be others, I think, on the other side of the spectrum that go, they're Muslims, I can't stand Muslims, they shouldn't be in our community because they've been enemies of America. And no matter what you tell me, they're going to be bad no matter what, and they have an agenda no matter what, and they're all the same. You're going to have that. And you're going to have a bunch of stuff in between. And the in-between, maybe I support them, but I don't like the placement of the mosque, or I support them, but I'm concerned about the traffic impact of the mosque. And there's going to be others on the other side that are going to say, I'm concerned about traffic and no taxes and the location, but that's a little bit of a ruse. The bottom line is like they just don't feel comfortable with Muslims because they're different than them. And then there's going to be people in the middle that are trying to figure it out. Like all of that's going to be true. And I just want to keep that in your thinker, because if you have some uncertainty or you have some questions or you have a little uneasiness or you're actually mostly in support, but you still got a couple of things you're not sure about, it's kind of okay to be on that spectrum as long as you're honest about what you're trying to process through. And the other thing I'd say is, and then making sure you're doing your honest, authentic, open-minded homework to get questions answered and to figure out what's going on and everything else. And then to just kind of process that in kind of an authentic and real way, right? Because here was the thing I was going to say about being a person that was a part of building a property on Main Street that was a church. When we did it, there was certainly some opposition to us, right? Like people were saying again, like there's only a certain amount of space on Main Street. We don't need another church. And especially people that are kind of a little bit more opposed to religion or opposed to church. They're like, man, now we're going to have this big building. It's not going to serve any of my wants or needs. I really want a Trader Joe's. I really want a restaurant. I want a whatever. I want a pool. There's a number of things that people want in this town. And they're like, just another big building on Main Street that's just going to be for religious purposes. And so they weren't super supportive of our presence down there. For all of that, when the examiner's hearing came, and I went and I kind of verified it today as best as I could, there was not a single comment made by anybody in our community to the examiner about our building getting built. Like there was, online public commentary on social media and things with people would say like that building's ugly and it looks like a lodge and a dentist's office had a love child or whatever it was, and this is just a waste and it's too bad and how unfortunate and it ruined the look of our town. Or I had a couple of people say, you mean we tore down that historic bank building to build that? And I'm like, that bank building was built in 1989. There was nothing historic about it. And the thing was falling apart and rotting to the ground. It was not going to be a blessing to have. And it sat vacant for 2 years with nobody wanting to buy it. It was just kind of, honestly, kind of a dilapidated building that soon was going to be the headache of the city. And so, I'm like, I think we did us a favor getting rid of that building, but I know what it's like to build. I know what it's like to have some public opposition. But when we did our hearing examiner, nobody weighed in. And there's a part of me, and this is just me being open. I'm not saying I'm right, but just in my analysis of like, so why were we as a religious building on Main Street, closer to Main Street than the mosque will be? Why did we not have any official public pushback at our examiner's hearing? But when the mosque came in, there was literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people speaking in opposition to it. And I do think part of it is why I kind of outlined the things I did earlier. I think it is the assumption that all Islam is the same Islam, and that just sounds scarier than a Christian church. And I'm worried about that. Or you go, it's Dearborn, Illinois, and I've heard about Dearborn, Illinois, and it's going to be just like Dearborn, Illinois, and I don't want that in this small town, and I don't want those problems. And therefore, it's just kind of a this. If that's an apple, that's an apple. Everything are apples, and that's kind of all there is to it. And I don't think that's the way we should approach it necessarily, but I think that's the way it was approached. And so while we sort of had no problems, this had a lot of public statement. And those public statements were, again, across the board. Now, here's what I want to say about that. So I was there for the live part for about 2 hours, and then I had to step away, and I caught some of the Zoom call for about an hour and stepped away, and caught the Zoom call at the end and stepped away. And I'm still waiting for that link to be published so I can go back and listen to all of it or whatever else. But I got a pretty good sense of things. And I think what's interesting is the first handful of people were against the mosque, had real issues with the city on how the city handled announcing the potential for this. Why did we not know about it in advance and everything else? And there was a lot of kind of commentary about that. And then there was a guy that was very apparently supportive of the mosque that stood up and proceeded to quite harshly chastise everybody that had questions, concerns, or even opposition to this. And he just got up and he kind of looked them all in the eye and he's like, you're a bunch of racists and you're xenophobic and you're hateful and just admit you're bigots, and just really laid into them. And I remember as a spectator to that, I thought, you know what? I can appreciate that you see something that you think is bullyish or you think is somehow motivated by, kind of somehow racial or xenophobic tendencies. But you're never going to cause those people to think different if you just scold and chastise them. And maybe that's my lesson for all of us, right? I think both the social justice warriors and then the culture warriors. So the culture warriors on the right, social justice warriors are on the left. And they tend to use force, shame, guilt. How dare you? Do better. You, whatever, just derogatory names, you pick them. And they go, that's going to score points with my own, but at the cost of winning over those who probably you most want to win over. And so my encouragement is, however you're working this through, as you talk about it with people, if you really believe in your position, don't use shame and guilt and manipulation or berating people as the tool to try to bring change. Because all you do is anchor people in their position more, because instead of them leaning in and going, oh, I got to think about this differently, they will pull back and they will build a defensive posture and they will want to retaliate. And I saw that in that meeting. So it was good that there was 2 officers in the meeting, because those city council meetings you see on the news every once in a while that blow up into total chaos. This got pretty close to that. So he berates everybody. They start yelling at him. People are cussing. If the cops weren't there, I honestly think it would have gotten physical. And so that guy, for all of his, I'm just trying to stand up for the little guy, this Muslim group that's trying to get a mosque, he made it much worse in the process, and probably didn't cause anybody that was already kind of opposed to this, didn't cause them to go, oh, maybe I should rethink this. I think it just dug them in more. And that's what's so unfortunate about that is like, man, you had an opportunity to say, like, I get it. I would be nervous too if this was my understanding. Can I tell you about these people? Can I tell you about what they want to do? Can I tell you about some of the challenges here and why I think this would be maybe a really cool thing for our community, even though it's scary at first, like you could do it that way. And he just used the full on, I'm going to shame you into oblivion. And it was unfortunate. It really was. It changed the energy of the room in a real negative way. And I don't think in that room it ever really got back on track. And that's just kind of a lesson, right? For either side of this discussion. If you use a lot of force, you're not going to do a lot of persuasion. Debates don't win anybody. Debates just reinforce positions. Discussions can be helpful. Persuasion's even better. And so I think that's kind of what it is. But for all of that, there's a lot of different things said, a lot of different things shared. There's a lot of things directed toward the city or toward the city council or toward the mayor. And just as another point of clarification, city council and the mayor really has nothing to do with building buildings in Duval. Not really, not in the most direct sense. They put in legislation for things like moratoriums or changes to general policies about land use or whatever else. But they don't really be like, oh, we're voting on the mosque tonight. Yes or no? The mayor doesn't say, all right, I want a mosque. There's the place we're going to put it. That's just really not in their purview. The city planning, city works department, kind of the bureaucracy that underlies that kind of handles those things. So when people are like, what did the city council do on this? How did they vote this in? They didn't. It wasn't their thing. It's not even remotely what they're engaged in. Same with the mayor. It's just not what the mayor does. And so just a point of clarification, this has to do with kind of the inner workings of any city. And having done a building, what I know is everybody has opinions on city government. I'm actually pretty positive about our city government. I actually think it's a hard job. I think it's a thankless job. And a lot of those people, their job is to say, you know what? We have been given rules and laws. Our job is to keep those rules and laws. There's a margin where we can make certain exemptions at times or certain waivers at times, but we want to be consistent in those policies. And then they have to break that news and keep those rules and maintain those laws with any number of groups of people that want to do things. And that's a hard gig, but that's what their job was. And so what they can't do is say, oh, it's a mosque, no. Or it's a church, no. Or it's a church, yes. Or it's a mosque, yes. They can't do that. They have to operate a little bit like blindly. Or, oh, it's a nonprofit, no, because we want tax revenue. Oh, it's a for-profit, great, let's build it because it's going to get tax revenue. They can't use nonprofit or profit status as decision-making to let somebody build a building in Duval. All they can do is say, here are the laws. Here's how that's zoned. They have to do all of the due diligence to submit plans and engineering and all of those things. And if they do that and it comports to the rules, then they can do that thing. And this comes back in part to property rights, right? Like if I own a piece of property and I want to sell it to somebody and they want to build a thing on it, those are all private transactions. And all the city can do with that is say, hey, well, what are the rules? What are the ordinances? What are the codes? If you all are staying within that, build a mosque, build a church, build whatever, that's fine. If there's certain rules in a community that says there's certain kinds of things that can't be built there, like you can't build a strip club next to a school, it's kind of obvious. That's a rule that's there and it's protecting a thing. But again, there's a lot of just private things, Bart, about private property rights that are just in play. So whoever owned that 3-acre parcel of land sells it to a group of Muslims who want to build a mosque, and the city just needs to make sure they're playing by the rules to build the building they want, and making sure it fits within all the codes. And then if so, and the city or the examiner says, yep, they've played by the rules, all things are in order, all of the surveys were done correctly, all of the homework that was assigned was completed and done in a way that shows the impact, then that's a green light. Go build your thing. And that's kind of the way this is playing out a little bit. And so I don't know if the examiner is going to come back and say, you got a green light, you can keep moving forward on the project, or if they're going to say, you got to do another traffic study because of when it was done. And that probably didn't get an accurate enough gauge on what property or what traffic impact will really be. Then he'll have to come back and say that. And then they have to kind of go back to that drawing board and everything else. But that's kind of the heart behind all of that. So for all of our opinions on things, there's just the reality that there's certain private property rights that people have. And then cities can't just arbitrarily say yes and no to things, but they have to follow their own laws set by the legislature of, in our case, you would say our city council. They're the ones that set a lot of that things, or there's state regulations too. There's things like that. But to kind of say the city either made it easier for the mosque or they should have made it harder for the mosque, that's just not the role of city government. To say that the city council or mayor had any relationship to that, they really didn't have any relationship at all to any of that. I've been going around and asking and just kind of doing some homework on it. There may be anomalies that I'm missing, but to the best of my knowledge and the homework I've done, that's kind of what it is too. And so that's why our building got built. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like, hey, there was things we had to do and there was a lot of extra homework involved and it was incredibly costly to do it. But at the end of the day, the city just made sure that we were playing by the rules and everything was being done according to standard. I can tell you, like early on, there was the person that worked for the city at the time. They're no longer there. But when our project was really early, they just point blank said, you know what, if it were me, I wouldn't let a church be built there, right? They just put their cards on the table. I wouldn't let a church be built there. But you know what? They couldn't not do it. Like they gave their personal opinion. Maybe it wasn't their place to do it. Maybe they just felt it was safe enough for them to share their opinion. And I don't hold that against them. I get it. Like I get it. I live in this town. I get it. I can see why some people go, really, another churchy thing on Main Street. I that's an argument I can understand. And so I appreciated even that candor at the time. But at the end of the day, they also are like, there's no legal thing I can do to keep it from happening. So I'm just going to make sure you legally do it right. You do it according to code, right? And so that's going to be the same thing for the mosque. At the end of the day, that's going to be the same thing. Now, with all of that said, I want to get into the weeds a little bit of a handful of things that came up with some of the commentary as it pertains to nonprofit, as it pertains to traffic, as it pertains to kind of the look of our downtown, and is it going to ruin it or improve it or whatever else. And these are just my personal reflections. I'm not saying they're rooted in all these concrete things, just some things I processed through, because I know you're all processing. Had enough people ask me, what do I think? Now you're getting what I think, and hopefully that kind of helps. So the first thing I would say is, like, I know a lot of people want businesses, and they go, businesses will generate revenue. If you talk to business owners in our community, none of them are thriving. I was talking with somebody even just today that the basic metric that a community needs for businesses to be kind of sustainable in a community is 10,000 people. So Duval is roughly 84 to 8,600 people right now. So we'd still have to grow by another 1,500 people to just finally get to the edge where some businesses could do pretty well. This goes back to why in 18 years, there's only been 4 buildings built on Main Street, and in that amount of 18 years. The library was funded by King County. Piece of cake. Our church was funded by private people that said it's important enough for us to be in Duval. We want to do it in Duval. And the only piece of property we could get to do this with was what we did on Main Street. I guarantee you, if we had a better option that would have been off of Main Street, we would have picked that. That's the other thing. Everybody assumes, like, oh, there's just property all over the place. Just put the mosque someplace else. The reality is there's limited amounts of property in Duval that aren't already spoken for to be developments, right? And that's going to get into this a little bit. And so what it cost us to build our building and what our building's worth, this is not an exaggeration. This may be news to some of you. In total, to buy the old bank, to buy the property next to it, to tear down the bank, to do all the stuff that was required, to build that building, 15,000 square feet, was $10 million. $10 million for 15,500 square feet, 48 parking stalls. And if we tried to sell it today, we might get $4 million for it, maybe 4.5. $10 million to build it, valued at 4.5. Yeah, that's bad math. What that came down to is we just had a group of people that so believed in this, they were willing to give a lot more money toward a thing that didn't have the value in the end. They just said it's for the purpose of, we want a church in Duval, we believe in this so much, we're going to go ahead and throw a whole lot of extra money that direction because we want something that is in our community that represents us caring about our city. And I'm sure there's going to be some of you that are going to be like, wow, that's a waste of money. You could help the poor. And I understand all of that. Those are all very understandable critiques. I get that. But this group of people felt very passionate about this thing, and this is where they did that. I'm just saying that to give some perspective, though, on why you don't see a lot of businesses building stuff out in Duval and moving into those things. Because it's going to take forever to recoup the cost of that building. It will be so upside down instantly that then many ventures are not even going to get lenders that will do that because you have to come in with so much capital in comparison to what the lending would be that they're just not going to do it. So the notion that, man, we just need to wait for all of these businesses to come into Duval, the reality is until you get to 10,000, most businesses aren't going to be viable. And then even then, it's only going to be certain kinds of businesses that are going to be viable and a lot of others won't. And that's why the only buildings that have come in that were privately funded for commercial purposes were Darcy's Dinky Donuts, which is super tiny footprint with a very low cost operation that yields a lot of return on investment quickly, right? In other words, it's cheap to make a donut and they can sell it for a pretty good price. The profit margin's pretty large. Same with coffee. And so Chris that owns Darcy's Dinky Donuts, he knew that even though the investment was insane on the front end, because it was, for him to build that little shack was ridiculously expensive. But he knew fast volume, fast traffic, fast movement on his product would yield a lot of return on investment and was going to be worth it. The other is the storage unit. And what makes the storage unit work so well is basically you're going to employ one person at a time, but you're going to make revenue 24/7 in all these teeny little stalls where everybody's paying a premium for every teeny little stall you can shove in a big square building. And they knew that was going to have a high kind of return on investment. It was going to pay itself off faster than most things. But here's what's not going to do that. A restaurant in Duval with 8,600 people. What's not going to do that is a small curio, or like a trinkety kind of store, some little niche market thing. Like it's not gonna do that, and you're never going to see like a Trader Joe's roll in. You're not going to see something that's kind of in that mid space do it. And so with that, all the more the notion of like, oh man, that property should be something other than the mosque. It should be something that generates revenue. Here's about the only thing that would probably go on that property if it wasn't the mosque: apartments. And that's probably the other thing to realize about this is that most of the properties that are going to get eaten up in Duval over the course of time are not going to be commercial, or they're going to be commercial on the first level and they're going to be residential on the next 1 to 2 to 3 levels. And I know already some of you are like, oh, you mean like Redmond? And I'm like, exactly like Redmond. That's exactly what's slated at this point, both on Main Street and up Big Rock Road. It's going to be first level commercial, second and third level residential. Now, why do I say all of that? One of the other critiques was traffic. What about the traffic? And the concern is the mosque is going to create all of this new traffic, and it's going to make already a bad problem worse. Well, the reality is going to be the way mosques function. Remember, they're more like monasteries. They're not like Sunday morning churches, where they're all there at the same time is much more rare annually, not just weekly, annually, than your average church. But if that property wasn't 3 acres of mosque, it's going to be 3 acres of apartments, right? And I don't know about you, but the average family has 2 cars. So let's say you're able to slam 50 apartments on that space of land, 3 stories high. Every apartment has 2 cars. Your traffic is way worse, right? Because it's going to be perpetual. They live there. They're going to go in and out of there every single day. And so I think just even to put it in perspective from a traffic flow element, the mosque actually will eat up a bigger chunk that will mitigate the amount of cars in and out. Because if it's not that, it will just end up being some kind of residential space. And it won't be houses. It's really going to increasingly be apartments or townhouses or whatever else that comes into Duval. Like I said, commercial on the first level, housing on the next level to 2 to 3 levels, depending on the facility. And that's going to continue to grow the density of Duval. And so even for the commercial properties that will eventually go in, they're going to be small. They're going to be niche. Like the options are always going to be kind of limited and what those things are going to be able to be. And that's kind of just the nature of Duval. That's kind of the nature of the amount of property that's left. It's the nature of how planning has kind of put things together. And that's going to be the trajectory. So my encouragement to people is say, how do we deal with the traffic? I'm tired of the traffic. Can we fix the traffic? I'd say, yeah, you have to move out of Duval because the traffic's never getting fixed. Not anytime soon, right? There's a little bit of talk again about, well, what if the state threw money at raising 124th? That's decades away from implementation. So 124th will be underwater for the foreseeable future when it comes to annual. Woodinville Duval is not getting widened out to anything. 203 is not getting widened out to 3-4 lanes. It's just the reality. If you live in Duval, you just accept that there's liabilities and blessings. And the blessing is quaint town, you know your neighbor. The liability is traffic's going to be terrible getting in and out. And it's only going to get worse as Duval grows. But if you want more commercial properties, then Duval has to grow to sustain those commercial properties. Otherwise, they can't subsist. I mean, already right now, I know of business owners in this community that have closed this year, on the brink of closing, because they just don't get foot traffic. And as much as we say shop local, the reality is we shop Amazon, right? And if you do shop local, it's a little thing here, it's a little thing there. Maybe it's going out to dinner or whatever it is, but it's just there's not a sustainability in our community for those things. So maybe that's the other thing is if we go traffic's the problem, well, if it isn't the mosque, it's going to be probably apartments, and it's going to be way more traffic, more bodies, more traffic. So in some ways, maybe the mosque is mitigating a little bit of traffic because it's eating up a piece of property that otherwise would just be tons of tight housing units in some capacity, right? And then as to the commercial front, again, opening a business and running a business in Duval is tough, and a lease is heavy duty. You need commercial builders to come in and build the spaces that will be commercial properties, but then they have to make that financially viable for those businesses because it is tough to eke out a living as a small business in Duval. So those are just some of the challenges for business owners and this idea that we just need more for-profit businesses to do stuff. It's just tough to make it out here already, and it's going to continue to be tough until we grow by another 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. And so that's just some of the metrics to kind of keep in mind with that. The other thing I would simply say about the mosque is that I know that there's some concern about the look. I know there's concern about how is it going to affect the look of Main Street, and it's like our quaint little Main Street. And I would remind, if you look at that property, it's right across the street from the storage facility. Currently on that property is a condemned house, a really terrible, not ancient, good-looking, cool old barn, like a built in the 60s metal scrap heap barn, and another condemned house. So you have two condemned dwellings and a really cruddy mid-60s barn. In other words, it's already an eyesore there in every way. And just as a little bit of a tidbit, when we were trying to figure out where to build Redemption originally, we looked at that property, and it was incredibly expensive. And we're like, we can't afford to buy the property and then try to build a building on it at the time. It was just untenable to us at that point. So whoever buys that, it's expensive. And then you got to engineer it and you got to deal with it. And it's really, really expensive, which when, again, I go back to not a lot of buyers for that, not a lot of ways that it could be used. So the fact that the mosque is looking at this, it's either that or a bunch of other tight residential, small footprint kind of stuff. And so I actually go, whatever they do with that property is an improvement from a bad barn and two condemned houses. So I think it's only going to make our community look better, not worse. The commercial property that's going to be right there on the front of their property, I go, hey, they're flipping the bill to put in commercial property. That's cool. You could have 3 little businesses in that space. That's pretty cool. And then all of the landscaping is actually really pretty. I think once you have the matured trees and that canopy, I actually think it's going to be one of the prettier parts of town. Like, I'm biased. I like our building, but our building, the amount of property we own versus the amount of property we can use was crazy. Again, that's why we were the only ones who ever care about doing anything with that property. It was so expensive for so little space. It's just what it was. And nobody was ever going to develop it. Everybody's tried and everybody's went, that's a giant waste of money. So it would have always been just a gravel patch and a building that was falling down had we not kind of done that. And I do think it brought a net improvement to that part of the community. And I think it's the same with the mosque. It's going to be a net improvement to that part of the community. And I think once all of their greenery's in and all the trees are there, I think you're going to look and go, wow, that's a really cool looking space. Does it look like a mosque in the mosque building? It does. It has that architecture. Some like it, some don't like it. I can appreciate that. But I like a little bit of kind of the cultural diversity that it brings. And I do think cultural diversity has beauty in its own right. And so I think that's cool. I think the other thing to understand about the mosque, some people have brought up the idea that it has a big gate around it. They're like, that gate doesn't seem very inviting. You're going to have these 2 big electric gates. How is that going to affect things? Can I just park in that parking lot? Will they let us and everything else? And why do they have to have the gate? Well, if you listen to the hearing the other day, at the end of it, Ali, who was kind of the spokesman for the mosque, was kind of walking through a lot of things. And one of the things he said, and it really struck me, is he says, I know we're being asked about the gate and the fence. And he's like, we would prefer not to have the fence. Like, we would like to not have it because it's an added expense. Like, that fence is not going to be cheap. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in that fence all the way around the mosque. They're like, we don't want it. It's just that your Homeland Security has said we need to do it because mosques are a unique threat. Like, not like they're the threat. They are threatened uniquely. And you need an added layer of protection if you're going to have a mosque in the United States. Like, that's heartbreaking to me in some ways. Like, when we built the hub, nobody came to us and said, yeah, you might want to put a fence around it because, people attack churches. And they do. Like, every week there's attacks in churches in the United States. But there's a higher threat level associated with mosques. And so they told them, you really need to put in a fence. Just one of those little tidbits that you go like, well, why are they doing this? They're like, we don't want to do it. But you know what? We've been told that there's a threat analysis and we really need to do it. So that's kind of even why that fence. And maybe that brings me to the core. I got to wrap this up. It's gone too long. It's already an hour. And hopefully it's not me just rambling the whole time. But it probably is because it's just a flow of thought and me trying to give you a little bit what I've processed through. But I just thought, what an interesting thing that, again, you have to think in terms of we're a peace-loving group that's had centuries of proof that we're peace-loving. We've had decades in the United States of proving that we're peace-loving. We've never once tried to bring Sharia law. We've never once tried to impose ourselves on the surrounding culture. We, in fact, tend to embrace the surrounding culture while still having a religious distinctive. And yet, for all of that, they still have to worry that, people are going to be against them. They're going to hate them. They're going to see them as somehow a threat to America, the way of life or whatever else. And I'm just going into saying, man, from all the stuff I can look at, all the stuff I see, wanting to judge every person as an individual or every group individually, I see a group that actually is going to bring a lot of good, isn't going to bring any real threat, except for the fact that there's others that are not going to approve of them. And that's perhaps the great threat. Maybe as a sidebar closer with this, I was talking to somebody the other night and I said, yeah, I'm gonna go to the city hearing. And they're like, oh, I hope to go too. And then she goes, so are you for them or against them? And I said, well, I like them. From what I'm seeing of them, they seem like super rad people. And she goes, oh, I'm so glad you said that. She goes, can you believe of all the places they could choose to be, they choose our community because they feel it would be safe for them? And I'm starting to get a little misty. I get misty as I get older. And I just thought, what a cool way to see it. That they looked at our community of all the places they tried to land. And they did. They had a place in Kirkland, but it was too small. And there was other things, it wasn't like we were per se like, we're all going to Duval for kicks and giggles. It was just they kept looking to find the perfect place. But that thing that says, here's a community that might embrace us, might love us, might see us as equals, as neighbors. And I actually go, I think that's true. I guess it's not going to be everybody. But I go, what a privilege. What a privilege, right? And I bring that into my Christian faith. I bring it back to Jesus. Jesus did not say, blessed are those who are self-preserving and put up their dukes, right? He said, no, blessed are the peacemakers. He didn't say, blessed are those who persecute. He said, blessed are those who are persecuted. He really calls us to do unto others as we want them to do unto us. He calls us to turn the other cheek and go the extra mile. He calls us to reconcile where there's friction. Like there's all these really great things in the Sermon on the Mount. Calls us to slay our ego and kind of lean into selflessness. And I go, this is just a great opportunity for that all the way around, right? To get to know somebody that maybe I didn't know, to become familiar with a faith that I wasn't as familiar with as I thought, or maybe saw it in a kind of a monolithic way instead of a more of a plurality of different offshoots, and getting to know this group in this time, in this place, and how they could bring a net positive to our community. And so I kind of close out with that, right? Just like, what would Jesus have us do? Not what my Americanism would have me do, not what my patriotism would have me do, not what my fear would have me do, or my suspicion or my speculation. What would Jesus have me do? Because he told this great story when it came to loving your neighbor. And it's the story of the Good Samaritan. And what I love about that story is here's a Jew, and he's telling a story about how a Samaritan is the good guy. But in a Jewish world, from a Jewish man, the Samaritans are bad guys. Samaritans don't play by the right religious rules. They don't believe in the things about God in the same way. They're seen as suspect. They're seen as dangerous. They're seen as threatening in some capacity. And Jesus uses that kind of person to upend the whole idea of what it means to love your neighbor. And he's like, that Samaritan that you think is bad, he's really good. And that Samaritan, it's proven by his good deeds that he's a good guy. And even though you think he's a bad guy, how can I help you see that you need to be more like him and less like you? And the way that there is a similarity there is the good guy always does the kind thing to the people in need, and the bad guy does not do the kind thing to the people in need. And it just reminds me all the more that we need to be neighborly like the Good Samaritan, especially to people that would be like our cultural equivalent of a Samaritan and me as a Jew. Or in this case, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm an American. These are Indian Muslims that are moving into my community. They're being very much like a Good Samaritan to me right now. How can I be like the Good Samaritan to them right now and not be like the Jews that ride by the other Jew and bypass the other Jew and don't care about their neighbor? I need to be the uncomfortable, be a neighbor to somebody that's not like me, but in that's being very much like Jesus. And I think that's what it's all about. So what is the title of this whole podcast? It's the Everyday Missionary Podcast. What do I see as coming in with this mosque? The opportunity to be an everyday missionary. For years, I've heard about sending missionaries to the 1040 window. And now I'm like, the 1040 window is moving into my neighborhood. How cool is that? Everybody gets to be a missionary. That's what we get to do. That to me is exciting. It's exciting. So I'm excited about this. And I like my new neighbors, my new Muslim neighbors. And whether their mosque gets built or not, I don't know. There's a part of me that really hopes it does. I do. I hope it does. I know that's not going to be really well taken by everybody, but I do hope it does. And I actually think it'll be a lot of good things for our community as well. So I think that wraps it up. And so I think our heart is just to be like Jesus and everything we do, everywhere we go, to try to be everyday missionaries.